Well, well. If we're gonna make it to heaven based on works, y'all are gonna get in. You're saying why? Very simple. It's Labor Day weekend. A lot of people are gone, skipping church. It's football season. There are people who are staying over in College Station and Austin and I guess still Waco and other places like that and Norman. And number three, there's one thing that will keep anybody out of church, be them Catholic, Baptist, or Pentecostal, and that is a drop of rain. So, welcome. Glad you're here. You guys, we're gonna make it, right? Yeah? Extra credit. Extra. Well, I was born in the mountains of North Carolina. And I was born in a town called Waynesville. Excellent, right? Waynesville. And the reason I was born in Waynesville is because the town that my parents were living at the time was not big enough to have a hospital, so we had to drive to Waynesville. So lived the first 5 years of my life in the mountains of North Carolina, and we would frequently go back to North Carolina to visit some close friends of ours. And I can remember as a young lad driving through those winding roads in the mountains. I remember the trees that were just ginormous, that just, were crazy in their size. And then I can remember the sides of the mountain, this just solid black rock. And as we would drive and wind our way through the mountains, I can remember my mom always trying to get my dad to stop at a fruit stand or to get some boiled peanuts. Yeah, that didn't happen a lot. And that's just a guy thing. Most guys, when we get on a trip, we're going somewhere, we want to get there. We never want to backtrack if we don't have to. So I can remember that. And I can also remember painted in white letters, someone would graciously paint two different signs on the side of the mountain as you're going around these winding roads. And one of the signs said, "Don't feed the bears." Yeah. Don't feed the bears. Now, the high school that I would have gone to in North Carolina, our mascot was the black bears, the Pisgah black bears. And almost once a year, you'd have someone driving through the mountains. They would see a bear. They're thinking cuddly bear. No, they would try to feed the bear. And, well, you know what happened next. So I understood that you don't feed the bears. As a young kid, I could understand that. That was one of the signs. It was painted, white letters, all caps, "Don't feed the bears." Another sign that was randomly painted on these winding roads in the mountain was a sign written in white letters, all caps, that said, "Jesus saves." Yep, Jesus saves. And it's like, okay, I can kind of grasp the whole bear thing and don't feed the bears, eating them. I'd read the stories of papers my parents would tell me. But the whole Jesus saves thing was kind of interesting. And though I grew up in the church, I can say I didn't really fully understand that, much less how "don't feed the bears" and Jesus saves relates. But crazy things happen in the mountains. Crazy things, bizarre things. And today I want to read you a story that, out of all the stories in the New Testament, I think it's one of the most bizarre stories for me. It's kind of like the Twilight Zone. Yes, the Twilight Zone meets the zombie apocalypse. But in this story, I think there's something interesting about life and about God and how people meet God. So check it out. It's in Luke chapter number 9. If you have your Bibles, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Luke is the third book in the New Testament. If not, the verses will be on the screen right in front of you. Luke chapter 9. Realize when you're reading Luke was a guy who was writing to a Greek audience, okay? Not fraternities and sororities, but he was writing to a Greek-speaking audience. Luke is one of the only non-Jewish authors in all the Bible. He's the only non-Jewish author in all the Bible. So Luke was a doctor, Luke was a historian. He was very meticulous about his dates and about naming who was in charge politically, about the places and stuff, because he wanted to give a detailed account of the life and times of Jesus Christ. So he includes this, Twilight Zone zombie apocalypse story. Here we go. Verse 28. About 8 days after Jesus said this, hold on to that, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. So it's interesting if you are looking at Jesus Christ as a leader, it's interesting that he chose 12 people. He chose 12. One of them betrayed him. So if you've ever been betrayed or are being betrayed right now, you're not alone. One betrayed him. So out of the 12, before he betrayed him, Jesus focused on 3. Isn't that interesting? So he called out 12, but focused on 3. That was Peter, John, and James. So he takes them up to this mountain in order to pray. He's going to give them a true mountaintop experience. So here we go. So as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. Jesus' face changed. And his clothes became as bright as flashing of lightning. And then 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking with Jesus. They spoke with him about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. Right? They're very sleepy. They were asleep, I guess. It says, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. Now, 3 questions to me come out of the text that we're looking at today. Three questions. And the first question, we have to go back to verse 28 where it said, 8 days after Jesus had said this. What did Jesus say leading up to this mountaintop experience that some people call the transfiguration, all right? Well, all these things were happening in Jesus' ministry. People are being healed. People are starting to follow him. People are beginning to wonder, who is this Jesus guy? Is he going to be our political leader who's going to overthrow the Romans and give us back our land? That was their concern. Could he be the one? So the buzz was going out all over social media at the time. Social media has always existed. Now it's just taken a different form, okay? So the buzz is out, and so Jesus decides to call a private meeting with his disciples. And he sits down with his disciples, and he says, hey, I want to ask you guys a question. Who do the crowd say, what's social media saying about who I am? Who do they think that I am? And someone said, oh, someone thinks you're Elijah. Right? Because there was an anticipation that before Messiah came, that Elijah was going to come back again. And Elijah, if you look in the Old Testament, is one of the prophets of all prophets. Some say, no, you're John the Baptist. You're a Baptist. That's what they said, John the Baptist. And then, so they were speculating. And then Jesus asked them the question. He said, who do you say I am? Quiet. One guy spoke up. A lot of you know who it was, Peter. You're the Christ. You are the Messiah. And Jesus said, don't tell anybody. Don't get that word out there yet, because I have to suffer. I have to die, and I will rise again. I'm like, they didn't understand what that meant. They didn't understand what that meant. I go, okay. Great, So after Jesus had said that, told them he was going to suffer, told them he was going to die, told them he was going to rise again, that's when he took them up into the mountain. But the question he asked there is one of the questions I see coming out of this text and out of this story, and that is, who do you say that I am? To me, that's the ultimate question. Who do you say that I am? And when it comes to, I think, understanding God, when it comes to understanding what Christianity is all about, everything hinges, everything rises and falls on the identity of Jesus Christ. Everything. So if you're asking questions, if you're wondering, if you're skeptical, if you're trying to figure things out, I would encourage you to drill down on that particular question. Who was or who is Jesus Christ? I saw an interview recently with Richard Dawkins, who's one of the most famous atheists in the world today. He wrote a book called The God Delusion, #1 New York Times bestseller, and this guy is just on a rampage to try to get people to convert to atheism. And he was talking, this guy was interviewing him, and they asked him about Jesus Christ, and he goes, this is Richard Dawkins here, he said, yeah, Jesus Christ was a good man. He was probably a good teacher. He was a charismatic leader. How else could he get all these people to follow him? And so I thought about that, and I said, I'm glad that Dawkins can admit that, but I really don't think Jesus Christ gives us that option. You may start off believing that Jesus Christ was a good man. You may start off believing that Jesus Christ was a good philosopher, or he had a lot of wisdom or a lot of good things to say. But really, as you dig in more to his identity, what people said about him who were around him, he was much more than a good teacher. I don't even think he gives you that option. I think Jesus Christ was either supernatural, God come to us in flesh, or he was a super nutcase, right? It's either super nut or supernatural. There's no way around it. And so one of the things that made people realize, man, maybe this guy is kind of super nut, was when he was talking to some folks who were pressing in against him, and he told them that before Abraham existed, I am. So, we were singing that song earlier, The Great I Am, and I always worry about songs and lyrics. I do. I've had a problem with that my whole life. I'm always talking back and arguing with hymns and praise choruses. Is that bad? I do. Like, I surrender all, I surrender all. It's like, no, I don't surrender all. I may surrender all now, but I'll take it back later. The more I walk with Jesus, I'm happier all the day. Happy all the day? I'm always processing. So, I know, that's bad. So the song, The Great I Am, I've always worried about this in our culture that's into I, me, my, I, me, I, me. And people think, I'm the great I am. I was like, maybe we need to define what that's all about. So I'm going to take a little time out here and define it because it relates to our message today. And that is the great I am. And what that reference is to the sacred name of God. So the great I am is who God has revealed himself to be. When God revealed himself to Moses in the burning bush, and he said, Moses, you need to go out, stop living in the lap of luxury, and go and rescue my people from slavery. Moses said, who should I tell them sent me? And God said, tell them the I am sent you, the great I am, Yahweh. So when Jesus said this in John chapter 8 to these religious leaders, he said, I am the great I am. They picked up stones to kill him, and I agree with them. When someone believes that they're God in the flesh, you either kill them or lock him up, because he's lost his mind. He's got a little messianic complex going on here, the original one. But Jesus, comes to us. He only has 3 years of a public life, 3 years. He has no money. He has no pedigree, no royal family. He never won a political office. He never wrote a book. He never traveled over 200 miles from his hometown. And yet we define our time as before he lived and after he lived. We're living, in 2018, 2018 years after the time of Christ. How do you explain that? Someone is interviewing Bono from U2 years ago about, this guy who was interviewing him was a French reporter and was an agnostic or a skeptic, and said, isn't it far-fetched to believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God or God in the flesh? And Bono turned it on him. He goes, no, I think it's more far-fetched to believe that someone who was crazy or mad, believing their God, could change the face of humankind. So the question I have coming out of this mountain story is the question of identity. Who do you say I am? Jesus asked that question to you, and he asked that question to me. If you're a skeptic, or if you say you're a believer, have you really contemplated, thought about, meditated on the reality that God has come to earth? Pretty wild. So what's interesting too, as I look at this passage, is to me, Jesus is gradually giving his disciples a glimpse into his identity. Gradually. But they still don't get it. They still don't get Jesus saves. They don't understand what that means yet. They don't get it. It takes them a while for it to sink in, so hold on to that. Another question I have coming out of this passage is verse 32, when it said they were sleepy, but then they became fully awake. And I thought about that. Now, looking at that, analogically, that, so many times we can sleepwalk through life. We can be asleep at the wheel when it comes to hearing God and being aware of what God could be doing in our life. And so the other question I have coming out of this passage is not just, who am I? Christ asked that question to you. But are you fully awake? Are you fully awake? Are you fully aware? And I'll say, for a lot of us, a lot of times, no. We're not. You say, why? It's because we have bad posture. I worry about our posture. I think 10, 20 years from now, we're going to be like that dinosaur, our posture. How can we be fully awake and fully aware when, out of 14 of our waking hours, we're doing this right here? You ever bump into people in the streets because they're just looking, oh man, you right? You right there? Man, we're in our phone. I'm in my phone. We're in our phone. We're in our texting, and we're emailing. And if we have, ample time and we're present, we're tweeting. So we, thank you. And so, we're just looking down at our phones all the time. I worry about it from a physiological perspective. I really do. How's that going to affect our postures? Just physically. But much less if we're so buried in technology, if we're not on our phone, we're binge watching on Netflix, or we're watching life on our 72-inch flat screen TV, or we have it in our ear. We're surrounded by so much technology. And by the way, listen, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying we should get rid of all technology, and all technology is bad, and you shouldn't have a cell phone, and you shouldn't do. I'm not saying that. But what I am calling out to us, not you, us, is that we begin to have a sense of balance and a sense of perspective when it comes to phone and being so tethered to technology. Because when we do that, I think it's very difficult to be fully awake to what God may be doing in your life and what God may be doing in my life. We've got to be fully awake. We've got to be fully aware. Blaise Pascal, who wrote, I think, back in the 1600s, was a skeptic for a while, and he was the brilliant man. He was a mathematician, a scientist. He was the inventor of analytical geometry. Thank you, Pascal, for doing that. And also the inventor of the first working computer. He was a brilliant man, a brilliant thinker. And in his book, Pensée, where he talks about how he became converted to God in Christ, he says this. Here's a quote. He says, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. All of our problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. How can we engage with God? How can we engage with others around us at work and at school and in relationships if we're not looking up and out and we're always looking down? So prayer I have coming out of this particular question is this. It would be, God, help me to become fully awake to who you are and to what you're doing in my life. Perhaps that'll be a good prayer for you today and tomorrow and Tuesday. God, help me to become fully awake, aware of what you're doing and who you are in my life. That's a good prayer. Because if Peter, James, and John would not have been fully awake, literally awake, they'd have missed this crazy, wild experience. They would have missed it. Where Jesus is being validated there by Moses, that represents the law and the Exodus story, by Elijah, who was the prophet of prophets, and they're talking about what's going to happen in Jerusalem when Jesus goes through the cross. They would have missed it. Look what happens next. Look at this. So the men were leaving Jesus, and Peter said to him, Master, it is good for us to be up here on the mountaintop. Man, this experience, this wild, bizarre experience is really good. I like this. He said, hey, let's put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And look at the parenthesis in the Bible there. He didn't know what he was saying. It's funny, isn't it? I like that. Peter, what are you saying? While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid. And they entered the cloud, and a voice came from the cloud saying, This is my son, whom I've chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this mountaintop experience. They kept it to themselves and didn't tell anyone at the time what they'd seen. I get what Peter was saying, didn't you? He said, this is great. We're up in the mountains. We're up here with Jesus Christ in the mountains and this Moses and Elijah, this vision or whatever's happening. This is great. Let's just stay up here. You ever done that before? In other words, have you ever been in a place, maybe you're on vacation and maybe you're in the mountains somewhere, or maybe you're at a lake, or maybe you're near an ocean, the beach, and you had a really good 5 days or a good week, and you're going, man, this is really nice. I wonder if we could move here and live here year-round. Have you ever done that? How can we move here? To me, that's what he was saying. How can we stay here in this spot? It's far removed. It's got all this energy and this passion and this glory and this experience we're having right here, this mountaintop. Why can't we just stay up here? And that's when the voice came out of heaven. Hey, this is my son I've chosen. Listen up. Listen to him. Listen to what he's saying. Watch what he's doing. The third question that I see coming out of this passage is all about listening. Are you listening to God? Are you listening to what God is saying and speaking to you? Where is he leading you? What is he teaching you? What is he saying to you to call out, that you need to call out and risk and step out and trust and faith? What is he saying to you? Are you listening to God? It's interesting, if we had time to read this passage more, they went down from the mountain into the valley, into real life, and they're immediately confronted with this chaotic, evil situation. Immediately. And I thought, isn't that life? Even on our level, not a biblical level, but isn't that life? After the mountain, after the victory, something happens, and you've got to go back down into the valley and into the grind and face the challenge and the evil that is very real in all of our lives. We can't stay on the mountain. So much of life is lived in the valley. And what's interesting is that as God makes himself known, as Jesus Christ is making himself known to Peter, James, and John and the other disciples, he did it gradually. Gradually. And do you ever think about that even though Peter had this incredible mountaintop experience that few human beings will ever have, even though he had this glorious experience, God, if you just show me a miracle, I believe in you. Peter has it all. But when it got chaotic, and when the wheels came off, and when Jesus needed him the most, Peter bailed. Peter flew off the handle. Peter started cussing and swearing, and he denied that he knew Jesus Christ, in spite of this incredible experience. Peter, like a lot of people, didn't get it all at once. He didn't get it. He didn't understand. I think sometimes God does speak to us on the mountaintops, but many times God speaks to us, and not just in the valleys, but in the ditches. I can remember years ago when I was a little kid trying to figure out the whole Jesus Saves thing, remember? I can remember this guy coming to our church named Rick Carino, and Rick Carino was a former member of the motorcycle gang, the Hells Angels. How many of you have ever heard of the Hells Angels before? Raise your hand. Yes, we have some old people in here today like me. Hells Angels. Man, during the 60s and the early 70s, they were the bomb.com. They were the really mean, tough, rugged, hellacious motorcycle gang. Okay? So this guy was a member of the Hells Angels. I remember this. You're going to get sick on this. But one of the things he had to do to get into the Hells Angels was to eat a dead cat. I know. I'm sorry. We'll move on from that. But I just remember that. I'm sorry. That's how rough and rugged this guy was, Rick Carino. So he's cruising around with the Hells Angels in that gang for a long time, had to do all kind of bad, weird criminal activity. It was a really, really dark thing. And the dude was just strung out on drugs, and he OD'd. I don't know if he OD'd on heroin or LSD. I don't remember, but his fellow angels thought he was dead. So they took his body and, boom, threw it in a empty dumpster. Okay? Threw him in the garbage. He's dead. So he was there in that garbage for 2 days. They thought he was dead. They just left him there. Again, they're Hell's Angels. They're not really concerned about burial and cremation and funeral. Dumped him in there. It was something happened. Someone heard something there. They were passing the dumpster. They saw this guy. They got him out. They took him to a place, and someone shared with him, hey, there is this guy named Jesus Christ who can come into your life, and he can change your life. And Rick believed that, trusted him, and began going around the nation telling thousands of people about literally how God had delivered him out of hell, out of the Hell's Angels, and into God's family. It was an incredible story. I'll never forget it. So many times I think God speaks to us and we realize who he is when we're in a ditch in life. Other times God speaks to us when we're in the valley. I think about C.S. Lewis, who was a skeptic and atheist for a good part of his life. And in the valley and in his work, there was a colleague he had there, and his name was J.R.R. Tolkien. He wrote a little book called The Lord of the Rings. And he started talking to C.S. about his atheism. He started talking to C.S. about his, and they called him Jack, about the possibility that God could really exist. So over time, finally, Lewis moved from atheism to theism. He believed in God. He didn't believe in Jesus Christ yet. And eventually, as time passed, in the valley of life, Lewis came to believe and trust in Jesus Christ. And he's become one of the most prolific authors and writers, of the 20th century. But it happened in the valley. So it's interesting as I see life played out, that God reveals himself to us in many different ways and in many different situations. Sometimes on the mountain, sometimes in the valley, like C.S. Lewis, and sometimes in the ditch of life where you have to cry out for help. Saw Bill Maher was interviewing Jim Gaffigan, and Bill Maher, not exactly a Christian, and he was talking to Gaffigan, and Jim Gaffigan's a comedian too. He's like, why Maher was like, why do you believe in God? Why I don't understand, why do you believe in God? And Gaffigan was like, hey, listen, man, I grew up, most of my adult life as an agnostic, but I got to a point where I need forgiveness. I need God in my life. And Jim said, I can't fully explain it to you, Bill, but I just need him in my life. I need him in my life. I just thought it was interesting. Again, how God reveals himself to people in so many different ways, in so many different types of terrain. And over time, I've discovered there are two things that are true. Don't feed the bears. And Jesus does save. Sometimes it takes time, though. It just takes time. Pray with me. Father, I thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the faithful here that have braved the rain and the holiday. Even football, God, here in Texas, because we believe in you. Others here are wanting to believe in you and not knowing where to start. God, I pray right now during this time of invitation, as we give people a chance to respond to you, give people an opportunity to join and connect with community and join the church, God, that you would lead those here who need to do that. Lord, if there are couples here today and families here today, if there are some singles here today who've just moved to Houston, or college students or high school students who need to stand and come down front, God, I pray that you would lead them to do that in just a few moments. Thank you for this time of invitation. We pray in Jesus' name. Right now, we're going to sing a song. JJ is going to sing it, not me. And it's a great song, and it's an invitation. If you're here today to stand and come down front, walk down these aisles, face these steps, and say, hey, we want to join and connect here today. Or maybe you're here and you're saying, I don't know where to start. How do I start? What does that look like? And God's leading you. You stand and come, make your way down these aisles, face these steps, and we'll sit down and we will talk with you, we will listen to you, and we'll give you some information that will be helpful to you in trying to connect with God. So if you're here and you need to join, what a great time to do it. You've already overcome the big three. If God's leading you here to join, you stand and come as we sing this song and make your way down front.